Well, because I... Oh, did I have those red lines on the whole time? Dang. Sorry, now I have that one. It's
Senator from
probably more
Kentucky.
copyright protected, so... Because I didn't want to just roll one after the other, Haverson's lesson and such. Like, I love his content, but I don't want to turn it into this being a session of reviewing his stuff in a way that might be construed as just ripping it off. I want some time just listening to that without playing it here, basically. But I also wanted to get right back into the gameplay while listening to something. So I'm going to be putting on some of my watch later stuff that I put together for now. Which, by the way, my watch later, some of it is stuff that I've already watched, but I just left on the list. Freaking 1,100 videos. I have a problem. So, yeah, that's a thing. Actually, wait, I need to pause and get more water. Yeah, I need to pause to get more water. This is empty. That one's empty. I need more water. I'll tackle that. It's getting late, too. Anyway, so, I'm gonna pause for a bit. By the way, I trimmed this. I don't know if the resolution's good enough for you to see it, but I did a shave and a trim. You probably didn't notice from all the way over there that it's any different now than it was before, but gonna look good for tomorrow. Business. Gotta get down to business.
Is recognized.
Pork barrel spending elicits images of politicos, fistful of cash to be passed out to the special interests. Pork barrel spending sounds bad and smells worse. Pork barrel spending is the original sin of Congress that big government types can't rid themselves of, can't rinse themselves clean of. Pork barrel spending is the grease that eases billions and trillions of deficit dollars to follow. What did our founders have to say about pork barrel spending, about earmarks? Well, the Constitution is quite clear. Taxation and spending are only allowed if they are for the general welfare. Justice Story, in our history, ruled that the General Welfare Clause was not a general grant of unlimited powers, but rather a limiting clause that meant that government taxation and spending must be for the general welfare of the people, not for parochial interest. It's not for a sex club in Philadelphia. It has to be for the general welfare of all people in the United States. It's not for a parade in Detroit. It's for the general welfare of people. The earmarks are pork barrel spending, and they are not included in the Constitution. Justice Story referred to Jefferson in reaching this conclusion. Jefferson wrote that the laying of taxes is the power and the general welfare is the purpose. So you can tax people generally, but you have to spend the money generally. It has to be what's good for everyone in America. It can't be good for Bubba Gump's Shrimp Museum in Louisiana. It can't be good for sugarcane in Louisiana. It's supposed to be for the general welfare of the entire United States. That's what Jefferson said. He said that to lay taxes ad libitum for any purpose they please, it shouldn't be so, but only to pay for the debts or provide the general welfare of the Union. Jefferson continued, in like manner, Congress is not to do anything they please to provide for the general welfare, but only to lay taxes for what truly is for the general welfare of everyone in the country. Madison argued that spending must be tied to the specifically enumerated powers in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Why would the founders have written the Constitution and said, we have specific powers that we're allowed to spend money on? Why would they write those specific powers and say, oh, well, whatever, just spend money on whatever you want to spend it on? They wrote these specific powers because that's what they intended us to follow. The 9th and 10th Amendment said if the powers weren't granted to Congress, they were left to the states. A lot of these earmarks could be funded by the states, but states have to balance their budget. Why do the earmarks bump from the state to the federal government? Because there's a printing press up here, and it's going full stop 24 hours a day, printing, and putting the next generation into debt. If you read Article 1, Section 8 that enumerates the powers for spending in the Constitution, you will find no references to funding organizations that host sex parties. The senators from Pennsylvania stuck an earmark in here for an organization that has public sex parties with whomever, whenever, groups, no numbers, in a public forum. That's what your money's going for. The senators from Pennsylvania put an earmark in here for public sex parties. Really? Does anybody think that that's in the general welfare? Does anybody not see our founding fathers rolling over in their graves that Democrat senators from Pennsylvania wanted to fund sex parties in Philadelphia? There's nothing in the Constitution that allows that. They also want to fund environmental justice centers, whatever that means, hell-bent on banning gas stoves. Really? The bill has 6,000 earmarks, over $12 billion in spending. So this is the cusp of it, but the overall spending is hundreds of billions of dollars, and the spending at this rate will lead to $1.5 trillion borrowed. What happens to the borrowing? The Federal Reserve buys it when the prices go up at the store. Why does a steak cost 20 bucks in the grocery store now? Because they've diluted the value of a currency by all these earmarks, all this giving, and all this unconstitutional spending. Decades ago, William Proxmire rose in this esteemed body to tell the American people about government waste. He was a conservative Democrat back when that existed. He awarded the Golden Fleece Award to the worst examples of government spending. Every month for 13 years he did this. Among the things he pointed out, a $27,000 study to investigate why prison inmates try to escape. Really? We couldn't figure that one out on our own? A $6,000 guide on how to use Worcestershire sauce. But here's my favorite, and Proxmire himself said this was one of his favorites. $100,000 research grant to study whether sunfish that drink tequila are more aggressive than sunfish that drink gin. This is where your money goes. This is why we're bankrupt. It never gets better. The organizations that fund this, like the National Science Foundation, they doubled their budget last year. You think we're going to have more or less of this crazy spending on drunk fish if you give them more money? So they doubled the amount of money to the people who are studying whether sunfish getting drunk on tequila are more aggressive than sunfish getting drunk on gin. There was always a certain amount of punch to Proxmire's proclamations. We could laugh at the lunacy of government, but that was in 1988, when our overall debt was only $2 trillion. Now, it's 34 going on $35 trillion as we speak. Perhaps government waste is not so funny anymore. There are 600 pages of earmarks in this bill, over 6,000 earmarks, pork barrel spending for which the Constitution does not approve. It adds up to $12 billion. It'd be difficult to choose which single earmark is the worst, but here's some of the top 10. $4 million for a waterfront walkway in New Jersey. You heard that right, $4 million for a walkway, for a fancy new boardwalk to help New Jersey's shoreline compete with Staten Island's. We're $34 trillion in debt, and they're going to take money that's supposed to be for the general welfare to help one specific town. This is a town with a median income of $100,000. You think maybe they could pay for their own boardwalk? $3.5 trillion for Detroit's Thanksgiving Parade float makers' new headquarters. So the people who make the floats for the parade in Detroit are going to get a new headquarters. Does anybody think that's for the general welfare? This actually is giving money to a private company. Where in the Constitution does it say we can take money from everyone and give it to a private company? That's unconstitutional. The Metropolitan Museum of Art is giving $1.75 million. You say, well, I love art. We need to fund art. This is a regional art museum, and it's a museum that has a $5 billion endowment. Some of the richest people in our country give to this museum, and that's great. Their names are on the wings of the museum. That's great. We have always had support by rich people in our country for museums. That's great. But we don't need to be taxing the everyday working man in our country to send another $1 million to a museum in New York that has a $5 billion endowment. They also have $1 million for the Environmental Justice Center in New York. There used to be justice that we thought should be colorblind. Now we have justice that is meted out based on the shade of your ideology. So if you're a crazy climate alarmist and you think the world's going to end and the polar bears are drowning from too much water, note to self, polar bears swim in the water, they live in the water. The polar bears are not drowning because of global warming. So we have the Environmental Justice Center, which is full of a bunch of crazy people who are only on one side of the issue. They believe that we should ban everything, cars, gas stoves. Your money's being sent to fund this politically charged nonsense that has nothing to do with justice. $500,000 for gardens in San Francisco. Now, I understand the smell is bad in San Francisco from the human feces, from the waste, from the trash, from the litter, from the drug addicts that strew all of their needles across the place. It's a bad deal in San Francisco. But you know what? They need to clean their city up. They don't need to be asking for taxpayers in Kentucky and around the country to plant flowers for them to obscure the smell of their problem because they've let their city go to rot and ruin. $1 million to a nonprofit in Minnesota to build a coffee shop for refugees. Think about this. You've just come to this country. Many of these are good people. They're some of the best Americans. They just got here, but we want to teach them about America. So instead of teaching the frugality of someone who's new that doesn't have much money, that you go to the grocery store and for 26 cents a cup, you can make your own coffee. Instead, we say, why don't we give $1 million to a refugee center so they can have a coffee shop and serve up $7 lattes to teach the immigrants that this is what's great about America. No, it's great about America to get $7 lattes when you're paying for it, not when the government's paying for it. $500,000 for a cybercrime vehicle for the Honolulu police. Who the heck knows if that's a competitive price? But for $500,000, you can apparently get 2 Ferraris, 10 Teslas, and 20 Toyotas. The question I have about cybercrime is, are they using warrants? Are they eavesdropping on all of us? Or are they actually doing warrantless searches of innocent Americans? But this is not something the federal government should be funding. $1.2 million earmark for bike paths in Rhode Island. Look, I'm a bike rider, I like bike paths as much as the next person. They should be funded locally. That's not the general welfare. A bike path in Rhode Island is the business of Rhode Island. Why should Rhode Island pay for it? Because Rhode Island balances their budget. Like every other state, they only can spend what comes in because they have no printing press. Why do they ask the federal government to fund their bike paths? Because we have a printing press. But that not only is not for the general welfare, it hurts the general welfare by causing inflation. Deficit spending causes inflation, and that's what you get with this bike path. Rhode Island has 28,000 millionaires. Why don't they tax their millionaires? I don't care what they do to their millionaires for their bike paths. Let them take care of it. But don't tax the rest of the people of the country to pay for a bike path in one state. The final earmark we have today is $209,000 for an air conditioner in the Charlestown Opera House in West Virginia. Now, you might ask yourself how that is of general interest or the...
By the way, this is a Forbes breaking news video, so it's Forbes. It's technically supposed to be public knowledge anyway. I doubt that they would copy strike people for it, and I have it on a different speed, 1.25. Not just for the copyright reasons, but also because I like to listen to this kind of crap faster. Yeah. Oh, issues. I'm gonna drown.
General welfare, and you would be right, it's not. It's very parochial. But you would also ask why they spent $100,000 last year fixing the air conditioner is going to cost another $200,000 this year. Maybe competitive bidding's not so good when you actually get free money from the government. These are the 10 of over 6,000 wasteful earmarks included in this minibus. I don't know which single one of them which would receive Senator Proxmire's Golden Fleece Award, but these are my terrible 10, and there are more. And this is only funding half of government. In a couple more weeks, they're coming back, and if there were 6,000 earmarks this week, I'm guessing they'll have 6,000 next week. It gets worse. It's leading to generalized inflation. So not only are they ignoring the general welfare clause, which means that spending and taxation is supposed to help everyone equally, has to be for a general cause, such as the national defense that we don't have for Maine or Rhode Island or Kentucky. The national defense is for everyone. It is a general cause. But when we spend it on parochial causes, when we run up this enormous deficit, it hurts us all generally. Inflation is a general punishment. So I would say this bill is not for the general welfare of the country, it is for the general punishment of the country because it continues a $1.5 trillion deficit that leads to inflation that causes all of us to not be able to afford food, clothing, gasoline. That's what this is. This bill is an insult to the American people. The earmarks are all the wasteful spending that you could ever hope to see, and it should be defeated.
We began this hearing by reciting a Pledge of Allegiance. I'd like to begin.
This one is
Again, by questioning.
That was Rand Paul calls out the top 10 worst earmarks. And then this one is why Jordan Peterson. This is why I don't embrace government use of facial recognition. Again, I got this on 1.25
in
speed.
the Fourth Amendment, because I think the other side of the aisle kind of forgot some of the terms that are in there. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. This is in our Constitution. Mr. Michel, can you tell us how the Bank Secrecy Act and exemptions to the Right to Financial Privacy Act may not be in compliance with the Fourth Amendment, or how the implementation of those acts may violate the Fourth Amendment?
Sure. Much like Brian Knight alluded to a minute ago, once the bank or a financial institution has the information, the government has it. So this came up in the early Supreme Court, or in the early court challenges. It came up in the Supreme Court cases those cases eventually went to the Supreme Court. In that we effectively have a law that is a blank check for the federal government or for law enforcement to obtain all of your information simply without a warrant. So
Without probable cause?
they do not have to get a warrant. They do not have to show probable cause to get the warrant.
Do they have to give an oath or affirmation
No.
to a judge?
No. No. They have to go to the bank.
Yeah, so it seems to me that these acts, they're not just out of date, but they're outside of the Constitution. Mr. Knight, you began your opening statement by characterizing some of the things that the government could know or infer about you based on how you spend your money. Could you elaborate on that or reiterate? What are the things that government can know or infer based on purchasing habits?
Government can know almost everything about you with a relatively high degree of confidence. They know where you live. They can figure out where you work. They can figure out potentially things like your sexual orientation. They can figure out, or at least have a high degree of accuracy in guessing what your interests are. They can figure out, or have a high degree of guessing what your religion is, what political beliefs you support, and they can potentially figure out, or at least have a better than average chance of knowing whether or not you own a firearm. They can also potentially know if you've had an abortion. And it's worth noting that after the Dobbs decision, there was a lot of concern raised about the sensitivity of medical information that would be available under the Bank Secrecy Act in a state that prohibits or severely restricts abortion. And so I just really want to drive home the point that this is not a left or right thing or an R or D thing. This is a situation where everyone has sensitive information that is potentially accessible with basically no due process.
Dr. Peterson, why are you such a Luddite? Why don't you embrace artificial intelligence and facial recognition and massive computer surveillance and cameras on every street corner so that we could all be safer?
Well, because there's tremendous danger and too much security. If the emerging collusion between government and corporation, gigantic corporation, continues in the manner that it is continuing, there won't be anything that you do that can't be used against you and will be used against you in very short order. And the concerns that are expressed here about the local consequences of that, let's say with regards to January 6th, seem to me to fail to take into account the much broader threat that lurks underneath that everyone should be attending to. We're in danger of eliminating the private sphere entirely. That's already happening in places around the world, particularly in
Take note of that this neat little glitch. What I didn't realize is that apparently you break the one above and it goes away. It's an interesting feature. Oh, whoops. Wrong block. My bad.
China. Fear one should be attending to. We're in danger of eliminating the private sphere entirely. That's already happening in places around the world, particularly in China, which is why I reference to that. That technology is at hand, and it appears as though both giant governments and giant corporations are utilizing it in every way that they can manage. And it's often motivated by the claim that that's forestalling an immediate proximal threat. Right? Well, that's a short-term justification for engaging in a tremendous long-term danger. And it should be perceived as dangerous to those on the left who are politically committed, because it will be the politically committed who are first identified by such systems.
Is it true that you have a PhD?
Yes.
Well, then why did Canada decide that you needed more education? Can you tell us about that?
Well, one reason, the entire transcript of an interview that I did with Joe Rogan was submitted as evidence with regards to the unacceptability of my views. What I was doing primarily in that interview that was criticized was questioning the validity of the economic models of economic collapse that were stacked upon the unstable models detailing out climate change 100 years into the future. That was deemed in Canada sufficient to proceed with complaints against me with regards to my professional competence to serve as a licensed psychologist. That was only one of many anonymous complaints that were fostered directly in relation to my political views.
Well, I thank you for showing up today. I think they may use your testimony as evidence that your re-education has not been successful. I yield back to the chairman.
Well done.
Today we'll go over how to handle it when someone insults you. We'll start with a couple classic destroy comebacks. These are great at winning over an audience and embarrassing the person who insulted you. Be warned though, they may make the target of your comeback hate you. Then we'll cover some friendlier, more charismatic responses so that you can come away looking cool and confident without making enemies. First, let's cover possibly the most brutal comeback of all, the high status reframe. Rather than responding to the insult, you respond that the person insulting you simply isn't important enough to matter. The classic example of this is from Mad Men, when Ginsburg is mad at Don Draper for not using his idea.
What do I care? I got 1 million of them. 1 million.
Good. I guess I'm lucky you work for me.
I feel bad for you.
I don't think about you at all.
You may think this only works in fiction, but in the next clips, you'll see it's just as effective in real life. The ultimate high status reframe is that you haven't even bothered to remember someone.
No, we don't go at it every time you're here.
Last time with the cocaine, I was in the front row with that, like...
I've been doing this for 19 years. Yeah, I remember that day. That's how important you are. Of course. I remember doing Letterman, Carnegie Hall, and talking to you.
Yeah, I'm of the younger generation, so I just wonder for all of you, who are you?
I TKOs people. When I knock people out, they don't f***ing move. Who the f*** is that guy?
Connor has his issues, but we can't deny fans love that comeback. Most people would make the mistake of accepting the frame of Jeremy's insult. They try to debate who hits harder, but when you use a high status reframe, you completely dismantle an insult without even having to address it. There's another classic destroy comeback that humiliates the other person so they regret insulting you. And same as the first one, the key is don't try disputing the insult. Instead, accept the insult and use it against them. Here's a quick example where someone tries to insult Kumail Nanjiani.
Is Kumail Nanjiani's multiple colors? Yes. Every shade of your mom's lipstick.
It's like that famous Winston Churchill story where a woman tells him, if you were my husband, I'd poison your tea. And he replies, if you were my wife, I'd drink it. Here's one more example. First, for context, watch Dennis Leary try to insult Greg Giraldo for being unable to rely on quick Churchill story where a woman tells him, if you were my husband, I'd poison your tea. And he replies, if you were my wife, I'd drink it. Here's one more example. First, for context, watch Dennis Leary try to insult Greg Giraldo for being unable to rely on quick wit.
This guy writes so many jokes before the show, it's not even funny. It's unbelievable. That's kind of what we do here, Dennis. We're comedy writing.
A gentle comeback like that rarely dissuades a bully. So Dennis Leary insults Greg a second time. Watch how, rather than fighting the insult, Greg accepts it and uses it to really burn Leary.
You're the guy in school that did all the homework and then asked if there was any more that needed to be done. Yeah. That's a good point. And if you had tried a little comedy writing, maybe your show would still be on the air.
There's two downsides to this kind of comeback. First, they're very clever, so it can be hard to do. And second, while you'll win over an audience, you run the risk of upsetting the person you're firing back at.
I'm really well.
There's another way to crush an insult that can still make a crowd laugh and avoid making enemies. Don't insult the person, insult the insult.
Well, Norm, thanks for dressing up.
Hey, Sarah, listen, man. Congratulations. That's the 100th time that joke's been done tonight. But I also want to tell you,
if it's something that's hard to fix, does it mean we shouldn't do anything about it? Because you said, oh, I don't know if we can change how people think. Does that mean we shouldn't try?
I mean, first of all, not a great impression. But beyond that...
This can make someone look stupid for insulting you without them feeling personally attacked. Now, if you don't want to sink to the other person's level and use an insult at all, another option you have is to draw a boundary. For example, watch this woman insult Jordan Peterson and listen to how he responds.
So what is your advice beyond banal comments like clean your room?
It's actually rather difficult to answer a question that ends with your comments are banal politely.
One way to draw a boundary is to simply call out the insult as rude. Then you can invite the other person to change their behavior.
I would consider that more of an opinionated personal and political statement than actually a question. So why don't you try reformulating that so that there's an actual question there?
If you found the insult truly offensive, you can also draw a boundary by calling out the insult and then shifting attention away from the person to someone else. This is infuriating to bullies because their behavior is often motivated by wanting attention.
Are you the fat guy in Hollywood still? Or does everybody like look at you and they're like, oh wow, this is great, now you're healthy?
Do you have any other questions that are smart?
Now let's talk about charismatic replies if you aren't actually offended by the insult, because you can often use a joking insult as a springboard for witty banter that makes the other person laugh. An easy way to do this is the tit for tat or eye for an eye method. Basically, when someone burns you, you burn them back in the same style.
I need to watch this movie.
You ever seen Spider-Man Homecoming? I haven't seen the Falcon. Oh no, there isn't one. Sorry.
You'll notice in the tit for tat examples, the comeback often makes the other person laugh. Since they started it, they don't really have a leg to stand on when it comes to being upset at you. The only two risks are if you really take the insult up a notch, or if you know the other person is sensitive. Tit for tat comebacks can be so simple, you can do them almost without thinking. Watch in this next clip how Finn reacts to his own burn. He clearly didn't even mean to say it out loud.
Can you read? This is really cool. Can I read?
Yeah, can you?
Can you host?
In general, the tit for tat method is a good way to turn an insult into fun banter. Within this framework, there's a good rule for specifically if someone tries to insult your looks. When you want to make someone laugh, try to conjure up an absurd image in the person's mind. Compare Chuck's insult in this next clip to Kevin's.
Your body ain't that good when you can just walk around without your shirt off.
First of all, if we're ever going to talk about bodies, I want you not to be the one to bring that conversation up. All right? If you don't get out of here shaped like a beanbag that got sat in.
Your body ain't that good isn't nearly as funny as you're shaped like a beanbag that got sat in. You may think Kevin is super quick-witted for that comeback, but that's actually an illusion he creates by having a few specific go-to insults he uses repeatedly.
Are we here? Are you actually going to do some working out?
Listen, you don't just get this.
No.
You want to feel that?
No, it looks like a skinny beanbag.
My body wants to get buff, but I don't want to scare my fans.
You have the body of a Dutch woman. Kenny has the body of a Dutch woman.
Now, not every insult needs an insulting comeback. Sometimes the most charismatic thing you can do is show that you're unaffected. Unlike what we've covered so far, this is incredibly easy to do and makes you look likable and confident with no risk of hurt feelings. One way you can do this is by answering rude rhetorical questions literally. So someone is insulting you, but you act like they're just asking you a genuine question. Here's a quick example you recognize from the Avengers movie.
Big man in a suit of armor. Take that off. What are you?
Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
And again, this doesn't just work in
I'm gonna need to cut this short sooner than it was, because I'm thinking that this is probably I'm not gonna play the whole thing on them type of thing. And I might get in trouble for what I already played anyway. I'm not trying to be a reaction channel here. I'm just trying to record my Minecraft gameplay, and I stopped playing. I was watching their content. Good night.